Anybody in the Carolina family doesn't say that MJ is number one, they're excommunicado. Come on now. Come on now. MJ's the greatest ever. Come on. Stop.
Yeah, he is. Motherfucker ain't lose nothing.
Yeah.
At all. He don't even know what losing is.
He don't know what.
Man, this man is MVP, defensive player of the year.
It's insane.
He's MVP, first team all defense, finals MVP, and leading the league in scoring all in the same year.
Yeah.
That's insane.
Only been done 4 times, all MJ. Say that again.
Yeah, that's crazy.
First team all defense, MVP of the regular season, MVP of the finals, lead the league in scoring. Only been done 4 times. MJ, and MJ. It was great playing with Mike because I got to see why he was Mike.
Yeah.
You think, a lot of times people think great players are great because they just roll out of bed and they're great. And for him, it was like, nah, the work ethic was crazy. At 40 years old, 39 years old, he done proved everything. He's still in the gym before everybody.
Yeah.
I mean, he's there with Tim Grover lifting early, getting up shots, like footwork is impeccable. Had a young dude on our team by the name of Bobby Simmons. And like MJ, Bobby ended up leaving us and ended up becoming
Milwaukee?
like... Yeah, I want to say like Bobby had like a couple of really good years. I want to say he got like most improved, something like that. But Bobby used to just, all the footwork stuff that MJ was teaching, like, yo, you read him this way. Like, yeah, when you jab this way, like everything he did was calculated. I was watching when he was teaching Bobby.
Yeah.
Obviously, he wasn't teaching me none of that stuff. You know, I couldn't do nothing with it. But he was teaching Bobby, like, yeah, when you jab, you read this way. He drops his foot this way, you counter with this. And so I started seeing everything. This ain't by accident. He's reading your body move. He's reading your body language. Oh, you drop that top foot. I know I'm going here. That defense rotates. I know I'm getting to this fade. Like, up and unders, all that, and it's just like. Seeing how much work he put in, how calculated he was, and then the competitive nature. I mean, he didn't want to lose nothing. Like, that's 2 years. I mean, you can't pay for that.
Yeah.
Like, you get to see the best of all time, and you get to see what makes him that. You know, so he just, in practice, he just didn't want to lose it all.
There's legends who know when to stop. And then there's Michael Jordan, the man who never did. By the time Brendan Haywood got that call from his agent, Jordan had already conquered the world twice. He'd retired twice, ascended to godhood, and had nothing left to prove. But one call changed everything. The bad news, his agent said, is that you're getting traded from Orlando. The good news, Michael Jordan made the trade for you. Haywood froze. He wasn't just joining another team. He was stepping into the gravitational field of the most intense competitor who ever lived. The Washington Wizards were supposed to be a rebuilding team. Jordan, now 39, was supposed to be an executive, not a player. But everyone who truly knew him understood one thing. Michael Jordan was never supposed to sit still. When he came back in 2001, it wasn't about the spotlight and it wasn't about the money. It was about unfinished business with himself. His body might have aged, but the fire inside refused to dim. He couldn't let the game go because the game had never let him go. That was the paradox of Jordan. Even in human form, he moved like myth. He didn't return to relive the past. He returned to remind the world what greatness looked like in real time. To Haywood and every young player who entered that locker room, this wasn't an ordinary comeback. This was a resurrection. They weren't just meeting a player. They were standing before a living monument, a man who had already been carved into history, but was still willing to bleed again just to prove the sculpture was real. And that was when they learned greatness doesn't retire. It only transforms. When the boss stepped back onto the floor. When Michael Jordan returned to the court in 2001, he wasn't a rookie chasing a dream. He was the architect of a franchise, the man sitting in the office upstairs, the one whose signature decided who stayed and who left. He was quite literally the boss. And then one morning, the boss came down the stairs and put on a jersey. Imagine that. The same man who'd been signing paychecks, now tying his own laces beside you. The man you feared to disappoint in meetings, now sharing the same locker room, taping his knees, pulling on his wristbands, breathing the same air. For Brendan Haywood and the younger Wizards players, it was like seeing a statue step off its pedestal. The air around him changed. Silence followed him the way spotlight follows a star. When he walked into practice, the volume dropped, conversations died mid-sentence, and a quiet electricity filled the gym. Haywood laughed when he recalled it later. Guys would be like, yo, we're going out tonight, you coming? And I'd say, man, y'all are partying with the boss. I'm good. That wasn't exaggeration. That was survival instinct. Nobody wanted to be seen in the wrong place or with the wrong energy, because when Michael Jordan was in the building, standards didn't need to be spoken. They were felt. But here's what separates Jordan from every other man who ever wore the title great. He didn't use authority as a shield. He used it as a mirror. He didn't come back to supervise. He came back to sweat. He didn't come back to reminisce. He came back to prove. He didn't descend from the front office for applause. He came down for accountability. He wanted every man on that roster to look at him, 39 years old, scarred, bandaged, yet relentless, and understand, this is what greatness costs. There were no lazy mornings, no optional practices. Jordan was in the gym before the sun, working with Tim Grover, the same strength coach who'd shaped him in Chicago. By the time the younger players arrived, Jordan was already drenched, the air thick with the smell of effort. He wasn't trying to impress anyone. He was trying to remind everyone. He knew his body couldn't do what it once did, but that only made him more dangerous. He compensated for fading speed with precision, for lost elevation with mastery, for age with intellect. He became the living embodiment of evolution through obsession. That season, the Wizards weren't just a team. They were witnesses. They saw what never settling looked like in human form. Jordan didn't shout his lessons. He demonstrated them. He didn't demand effort. He redefined what effort meant. He didn't need to tell you to stay late, because when a 39-year-old legend is still shooting at midnight, you stay. The younger players tried to hide their fatigue, pretending they could keep up, but everyone knew. They could see it. The cold glow of discipline in his eyes, the rhythm of repetition that had no end. He was no longer chasing greatness. He was guarding it. And here lies the paradox of Jordan. He didn't return because he missed the roar of the crowd. He returned because he missed the silence of the gym. He missed the smell of hardwood and sweat, the sound of the ball echoing in emptiness. Before the day began, that sacred solitude where greatness is reborn daily. When he stepped back on the court, Jordan wasn't telling the world, "I'm back." He was whispering to himself, "I'm still me."
And that whisper was louder than any cheer. For those 2 years, the Wizards didn't just have a leader, they had a living standard. He was both boss and soldier, teacher and competitor, memory and proof. And for every young man who shared that locker room, one truth became undeniable. Michael Jordan didn't come back to relive the past. He came back to remind the world that greatness is not a moment, it's a condition. It doesn't retire, it doesn't fade, it doesn't negotiate with time. It simply steps back onto the floor, looks around, and says, "I'm still the standard. The work never dies." At 40, greatness is still a habit. Most players slow down as they age. The body grows heavy, the hunger softens, the game begins to feel like work. But for Michael Jordan, work was never punishment. It was oxygen. Brendan Haywood still remembers the sight, a 39-year-old legend, older than some assistant coaches, still beating every man to the gym. When the younger players walked in, Jordan was already there, drenched in sweat, lacing up his shoes for another round. "He's there with Tim Grover," Haywood said, lifting early, getting up shots. The footwork is impeccable. Everything he did was calculated. It wasn't the flashy moves that impressed Haywood, it was the precision. Jordan's game had become a science of centimeters and timing. He wasn't flying anymore, he was dissecting. He had transformed from athlete to architect. He would study a defender's hips, the angle of a foot, the twitch of a shoulder. If you dropped your top foot, he already knew where he was going. If you rotated your head to glance at help defense, he knew you were beaten. Every jab step was a question, every fake was a test, and every reaction a verdict. And behind that mastery was an obsession. The kind of hunger that doesn't care about age, accolades, or applause. Because Jordan, even after conquering everything, still needed the grind. It wasn't about championships anymore. It was about communion. The court was his sanctuary, the repetition his prayer, the sweat his ritual. That's what greatness looks like when no one is watching. It's the 6 a.m. lifts when your knees ache. It's the 1,000th jumper after practice when everyone else has gone home. It's the refusal to let rust touch your name, even when history has already immortalized it. That's why Brendan Haywood said, "People think great players just roll out of bed and they're great." For him, it was different. Different because he wasn't maintaining greatness. He was still chasing it, even at 40, even when he had nothing left to prove. And in those long mornings, the young Wizards players began to see it, the quiet, relentless rhythm of excellence. Jordan didn't talk about being the best. He showed it through 1,000 small movements that spoke louder than any speech. He wasn't just training his body, he was training the room. His discipline infected everyone around him. Bobby Simmons, one of the team's younger players, became his pupil. Jordan taught him the geometry of a fence, how to read the way a defender leaned, how to jab, how to counter, how to attack a weakness invisible to ordinary eyes. Simmons listened, absorbed, practiced. A year later, after leaving Washington, he won the NBA's Most Improved Player Award. That wasn't coincidence, that was curriculum. Jordan didn't need to coach, he just needed to exist. His example was the lesson, his work ethic was the textbook. Haywood summed it up perfectly. You can't pay for that. You get to see the best of all time, and you get to see what makes him that. It's a simple statement, but beneath it lies the ultimate truth. Greatness is not magic, it's maintenance. It's what you do when no one is keeping score. It's the fight you keep fighting even after you've already won. Most players retire when the applause fades. Michael Jordan stayed in the gym because the silence was his applause. Even as his knees ached and his body aged, he refused to betray the code that had defined him. Work comes first, excuses come last. He wasn't chasing youth, he was chasing purity. The pure feeling of being prepared, sharp, alive, ready. Because for Jordan, that feeling was greater than any trophy. That's why even in his final years, players like Haywood looked at him and finally understood. Now I see why he's Mike. Not because he could still score 40 on any given night, though sometimes he did, but because he embodied a truth that transcended basketball. Greatness is not something you achieve, it's something you keep alive. And for Michael Jordan, even at 40, the work never died. He still strikes fear, the timeless aura. Fear is a strange thing. It doesn't always come from power. Sometimes it comes from presence. At 40 years old, Michael Jordan didn't need to jump over you anymore. He didn't need to score 50 to make you crumble. All he had to do was look at you, and you knew. Brendan Haywood remembered those moments in vivid detail. Young players, 22, 23 years old, walked onto the court trembling with excitement. They had grown up worshiping the man in front of them. Posters of him hung above their beds. His number 23 was stitched onto their school jerseys, and now he stood across from them, real, alive, still wearing the same cold stare. He could see it, Haywood said. He could see the young guys looking at his shoes, at the knee brace, just staring in awe. He knew it. He'd say, "I got him." That's all it took. Before the ball was even tipped, the game was over. Jordan could sense fear the way a shark senses blood. It wasn't arrogance, it was instinct. He'd been the apex predator for so long that he could read hesitation in the blink of an eye. The second he saw it, he attacked it. He wasn't just competing anymore. He was hunting reverence. He wanted to prove that respect alone couldn't save you. You could love him, admire him, worship him, but the moment you stepped on that floor, he'd destroy you, just to remind you that he still could. Even in those final years with Washington, the aura remained intact. The younger generation players who'd grown up idolizing him couldn't escape the weight of his legend. Facing him felt like stepping into a myth that was still alive. Jordan didn't have to say much. He'd walk up to the jump ball, chew his gum, glance at his opponent, and that was enough. The eyes that once haunted the Pistons, the Celtics, the Lakers, they still burned the same.
Haywood laughed when he recalled what would happen next. He'd tell our point guard, "Yo, see that young fella? Let me get him early tonight." He's in awe. And sure enough, a few possessions later, that young fella would be broken. Not physically, psychologically. That was Jordan's greatest weapon. Not the fadeaway, not the first step, not even the vertical leap. It was the aura, the invisible gravity that bent the will of those who entered his orbit. No other athlete has ever carried that kind of energy, not just dominance, dread. Even his teammates could feel it. Practice sessions became psychological warfare. No one wanted to be the guy who lost a drill because Jordan turned everything from free throw competitions to rebounding scrimmages into blood sport. He didn't want to lose anything, Haywood said. Anything. Not a game, not a possession, not a warm-up. That is the kind of fear only the truly great can inspire. The fear of letting him down, of not being worthy of his presence, of being the one who breaks the standard. And that's why even in the twilight of his career, players still feared Michael Jordan the same way their idols once did. He didn't just dominate an era, he haunted it. And the haunting lingered long after his body aged. What makes it even more remarkable is that fear no longer came from intimidation, it came from reverence. Opponents didn't fear being beaten, they feared being disrespected by the man who defined basketball itself. Michael Jordan's aura was never built on mystery, it was built on evidence. Decades of dominance, perfection, obsession, they coalesced into something spiritual. He was both man and myth, flesh and folklore. And when he stood on the court at 40, the message was simple. You can't kill what you can't forget. Because fear, real fear, doesn't age. It only grows with the legend that created it. Even when the body slowed, even when the legs no longer soared, his presence still towered above the game. Invisible, inevitable, immortal. That is the definition of greatness. When your aura keeps winning long after your body stops. He never wanted to lose anything, the fire that never knew defeat. There are athletes who hate losing. Then there was Michael Jordan, a man who simply did not understand it. Brendan Haywood didn't exaggerate when he said it. He didn't want to lose anything. He didn't mean championships. He meant everything. A shooting drill, a free throw contest, a game of cards, a scrimmage in practice, a one-on-one after training. It didn't matter if there were cameras or silence. It didn't matter if it was midnight or morning. For Jordan, competition was constant. At 40 years old, he was no longer the fastest or the highest jumper. His knees creaked, his lungs burned faster. But his will, that violent, unrelenting will, refused to die. He turned every interaction into a test of hierarchy. If a young player scored on him, Jordan didn't see it as a bucket. He saw it as a declaration of war. The next possession, he'd isolate that player, back him down, hit the fadeaway, and stare through his soul. Then he'd whisper, "That's the last one you're getting tonight." And he meant it. Haywood remembered those moments in practice vividly. the temperature in the room rising with every possession, Jordan barking, taunting, daring anyone to challenge him. He wasn't doing it for ego. He was doing it to remind the world and himself that greatness is not rented. It must be defended daily. The younger players tried to meet his intensity, but none could sustain it. Jordan's fire was unnatural, forged in a different era, the 1980 seconds and 90 seconds, when every game was war and every handshake had blood beneath it. He carried that energy into the 2000s like a time traveler refusing to adapt to a softer world. Even when his body betrayed him, his mind refused to yield. He could no longer rely on speed, so he weaponized psychology. He studied your habits, your tics, your breath. He'd find the moment you exhaled too long. That's when he'd strike. In his 2 years with Washington, Jordan's numbers were mortal, but his mentality remained divine. Teammates didn't just play basketball around him, they experienced an education in obsession. He showed them what it meant to approach every second like it could define your legacy. You can't pay for that, Haywood said. You get to see the best of all time, and you get to see what makes him that.
That line, what makes him that, is the heartbeat of the GOAT argument. Because when the talent faded, when the dunks disappeared, when the legs stopped lifting him above the rim, the thing that made him Michael Jordan still burned exactly the same. It's easy to be great when you're young and the world cheers for you. It's something else entirely to still demand excellence from yourself when no one expects it. When you've already won everything, when the scoreboard no longer matters. That's why Jordan's Wizards years matter more than people realize. They weren't about stats, they were about standards. He wasn't chasing championships anymore. He was chasing consistency, the ability to remain himself even as time tried to change him. He didn't care that his body was slower. He didn't care that the Wizards weren't title contenders. He cared that the work still got done. He cared that the fire still burned. And that's what separates Michael Jordan from every player who came after. LeBron James, Kobe Bryant, Kevin Durant, all brilliant, all dominant. But even they would tell you nobody hated losing like Mike. Because for him, losing wasn't just failure. It was a fracture in identity. He didn't know who he was without the hunger, without the war, without the battle to win something. Jordan was proof that greatness is not measured by victory. It's measured by refusal. Refusal to fade, refusal to accept, refusal to stop caring. Even as his career wound down, his passion burned brighter than ever. That's why Haywood said, with reverence and exhaustion, you can't pay for that, because you can't buy that kind of madness. You can't fake that kind of devotion. You can only witness it, and hope a little of it rubs off on you.